My name is Sophia Bennett. I was 28 when I found out someone could spend 6 months acting like your boyfriend, gladly accept everything you gave him, and still look you in the eye and tell you. None of it had meant what you thought. I met Ethan Carter on a rainy Thursday evening at a small coffee shop a few blocks from my office. The place was packed. The only empty seat was across from me. He stopped beside my table, balancing a paper cup in one hand. His dark hair was still damp from the rain. Mind if I sit here? I glanced at the empty chair. Only if my imaginary friend doesn't come back. He laughed. I'll risk it. What should have been a 10-minute conversation stretched into nearly 2 hours. Talking to Ethan felt effortless. He had a way of making ordinary stories funny, and he actually listened instead of waiting for his turn to speak. At one point I mentioned that I hated raisins. He looked at the untouched muffin beside my laptop. So you've been staring at that muffin for 40 minutes because you're scared of raisins? I'm not scared of them. No, he grinned. Then why does it look like you're waiting for it to make the first move? I laughed so hard people at the next table turned to look. When the rain finally eased, he asked for my number. I gave it to him without thinking twice. Later that night, my phone lit up. Made it home, or did the raisins finally win? I caught myself smiling at the screen. From then on, we talked every day. Most mornings started with a photo from his commute. By lunch, he'd ask what I was eating, and before bed, he'd usually call just to hear about my day. Before long, I knew he took his coffee black, couldn't fall asleep without an old action movie playing in the background, and never missed his Sunday call with his mom, even when they were arguing. He picked up on my habits just as quickly. He knew I'd check the apartment door twice before bed whenever I was anxious, and he learned that old jazz records were the fastest way to calm me down after a difficult day. Everything between us felt effortless, and that was exactly what made it so easy to overlook the warning signs. The first time we had dinner together, Ethan reached for the check before opening his banking app. His expression shifted almost immediately. My client still hasn't paid me, he said with an embarrassed laugh. I'm usually not this disorganized. It's okay, I said, pulling out my wallet. I've got this one. He rubbed his jaw. No, I invited you. Then you can get the next one. He looked relieved. Deal. There was always supposed to be a next time. As the months passed, paying gradually became my role without either of us ever acknowledging it. One week it was dinner, another week movie tickets, then a birthday gift he'd casually mentioned wanting. Whenever money became an issue, there was always another explanation waiting. A client who hadn't paid, unexpected car repairs, higher rent, a frozen debit card. None of those excuses sounded unreasonable on their own, so I accepted them without questioning how often they kept happening. By the time his birthday arrived, I'd already bought him the watch he'd admired in a store window weeks earlier. When he opened the box, he froze for a second before looking up at me. You actually remembered. I smiled. Of course I did. He pulled me into a hug. You're incredible. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he murmured, I'm lucky to have you. At the time, those words felt like everything I'd been waiting to hear. It wasn't until much later that I realized what he'd actually said. He never told me he was lucky to be with me, only that he was lucky to have me. When we were alone, Ethan never acted like someone who was unsure about us. He reached for my hand without thinking, brushed my hair away whenever it fell across my face, and spent so many nights at my apartment that I cleared out a drawer for his clothes. One evening, while we were watching a movie, he wrapped an arm around me and rested his chin lightly on my head. You fit perfectly here. Moments like that made it easy to believe we were only waiting for the conversation to catch up with the relationship. Instead, every time I tried to talk about where we were headed, something shifted. After he'd spent 3 nights in a row at my apartment, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. What do you tell people about me? He looked up from his phone. What do you mean? If someone asks whether you're dating anyone, what do you say? A small smile crossed his face, but it never reached his eyes. I tell them there's someone special in my life. I couldn't help frowning. That's a carefully chosen answer. Sophia? I'm not asking you to propose. I just want to know what this is. He set his phone aside and reached for my hand. I care about you. You know that. But? He let out a slow breath. I'm not ready to put a label on us. We've been seeing each other for almost 3 months. I know. Then what are we waiting for? Instead of answering, he searched my face for a moment before saying, Things have been good, haven't they? That's not what I asked. He gently squeezed my fingers, as if a reassuring touch could replace an honest answer. I don't want pressure to ruin what we have. I wanted to challenge him, but somehow I ended up feeling guilty for bringing it up at all. The next morning, he arrived with my favorite coffee and acted as though the conversation had never happened. Before lunch, he'd already sent a string of heart emojis and a message saying he missed me. It took me months to recognize the pattern. Every time I asked where we stood, he'd become sweeter instead of giving me an answer. Some days he'd check in constantly, asking if I'd eaten, how my presentation had gone, or telling me he missed seeing my face. Then, without warning, he'd disappear for hours. Eventually, a short reply would appear on my screen. Most replies were the same. Busy. Talk later. Can't tonight. Every time I'd come up with an explanation before he had to. Work must be overwhelming. Maybe he needed space. Maybe healthy relationships weren't supposed to require constant reassurance. I kept defending him because admitting the truth would have meant questioning everything I believed we were building. The hardest part was admitting something I'd avoided for months. We weren't actually in a relationship. I'd simply been treating us like we were. Looking back, the warning signs had always been there. Ethan never posted a photo of us, even though he documented almost every other part of his life online. Weekend plans were constantly canceled because his mom suddenly needed help or a client had an emergency. Whenever we were together, his phone stayed face down, as though that had become second nature. One evening, while he was in the shower, his screen lit up. A message from Madison appeared. "Are we still meeting tomorrow?" I didn't unlock his phone or scroll through anything else. When he came back into the room, I mentioned it as casually as I could. His eyes flicked to the phone before he answered. "She's just an old friend." "An old friend you're making plans with?" He gave a small laugh. "You're reading too much into it." I asked one question, and I answered it. Before I could say anything else, he kissed my forehead and asked where I wanted to go for dinner. That was how our difficult conversations usually ended, or more accurately, how I allowed them to end. Whenever something didn't quite make sense, I'd invent an explanation before Ethan had to. I told myself patience was a sign of trust, and that asking for less would somehow make him feel safer with me. Deep down, I believed that if I loved him well enough, he'd eventually stop hesitating and choose me. 6 months slipped away like that. 6 months of dinners, gifts, late-night calls, quiet mornings together, and conversations that always changed direction whenever I asked where we were headed. Then, one Friday evening, Ethan called while I was wrapping up work. "Are you free tomorrow?" "I can be. There's a cafe downtown I've been wanting to try. How about 2?" Something about his voice felt different. "Everything okay?" There was a short pause before he answered. "Yeah, I just think we should talk." The call lasted less than a minute, but I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the afternoon. I was convinced the conversation I'd been waiting 6 months to have had finally arrived. On my way home, I passed a leather goods store and spotted the briefcase Ethan had shown me online a few weeks earlier. He'd laughed about how expensive it was, saying clients would probably take him more seriously if he carried something like that. I walked inside. The price made me hesitate, but not for long. I could already picture him opening the box, smiling, pulling me into a hug, and finally saying the words I'd wanted to hear for months. So I bought it. That night, the wrapped gift sat beside my bed while I decided what to wear the next afternoon. I fell asleep, believing Ethan had finally reached the same place I had. I had no idea he was coming to tell me there had never really been an us. The next afternoon, I arrived at the cafe almost 20 minutes early. The briefcase rested inside a plain shopping bag beside my chair. I'd spent nearly 3 months saving for it, picking up extra shifts and cutting back on anything that wasn't essential. At the time, every sacrifice had felt worthwhile. I kept imagining Ethan's reaction. Maybe he'd smile. Maybe he'd take my hand. Maybe he'd finally say, "Sophia, I'm done pretending. You're my girlfriend." It sounds naive now. Back then, it felt completely possible. 2 o'clock passed. At 2:15, my phone buzzed. "Running a little late. Don't be mad." I smiled despite myself, ordered our coffees, and told myself traffic must be awful. At 2:40, I looked toward the front window. That's when I saw him. Relief lasted exactly 1 second before I realized he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him with her arm comfortably linked through his. They were laughing about something, and Ethan leaned closer to say another joke. She nudged his shoulder playfully, and he laughed again. A carefree laugh I hadn't heard in weeks. Everything inside me went still. They stopped outside the cafe. Without thinking, she reached up and straightened the collar of his jacket. He didn't pull away. He didn't even hesitate. He simply let her. Frozen behind the glass, I searched for another explanation. Maybe she was family. Maybe a coworker. Maybe I was missing something obvious. Then Ethan looked up. The moment he saw me, the smile disappeared from his face. His shoulders stiffened. For a few long seconds, neither of us moved. He quickly said something to the woman. She followed his gaze toward the cafe, spotted me, and whatever he whispered erased the smile from her face as well. Before I realized what I was doing, I'd already stood up. The shopping bag with the briefcase was still sitting beside my chair as I walked outside. Ethan hurried toward me before I reached the sidewalk. "Sophia?" His voice already sounded defensive. I looked past him at the woman before meeting his eyes again. "Who is she?" Neither of them answered. The silence was brief, but it said enough. The woman spoke first. "I'll give you 2 a minute." She stepped aside, leaving Ethan alone with me. "It's not what it looks like," he said. A bitter laugh escaped me. "You don't even know what I think it looks like." I was going to explain. "When?" "Today. You invited me here." "I know. Were you planning to introduce us?" "No." "Then why is she here?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That answer hurt more than any explanation could have. I looked toward the woman once more. She waited calmly, without the slightest hint of awkwardness, as if standing beside Ethan was the most natural thing in the world. In an instant, everything I'd spent months explaining away finally made sense. Suddenly, every canceled weekend, unanswered message, and flimsy excuse made sense. He'd simply been making room for someone else. I folded my arms. So, who is she? He looked away. Her name's Madison. The same Madison who texted you the other night? You saw that? I saw her name. You told me she was just an old friend. He sighed. We've known each other for a long time. That doesn't answer my question. He stared at the sidewalk for several seconds before finally saying it. We've been seeing each other. The words landed like a punch. Seeing each other? It's complicated. I shook my head. No, Ethan, it's really not. I held his gaze. Are you dating her? He stayed silent. He didn't have to answer. His face already had. The sounds around us faded as 6 months replayed in my head. Every dinner, every late-night call, every promise hidden behind affectionate gestures. I couldn't stop wondering how many times he'd left my apartment only to go see her. I swallowed hard. What about us? Sophia, what have we been doing for 6 months? His shoulders dropped. I never wanted to hurt you. Then tell me the truth. He lowered his eyes. I think we should just be friends. That was the moment I accepted there had never been an us. Around us, everyone carried on as though nothing had happened. I looked at him. Friends? He nodded. I care about you. No. My voice stayed calm. You cared about what I brought into your life. That's not fair, isn't it? You held my hand. You stayed at my apartment. You introduced me to your friends. Every single thing you did made me believe we were building a future together. His jaw tightened. I never actually promised that. For a moment, I couldn't argue. Because he was right. He had never said the words. He'd simply let me fill in the blanks while quietly accepting everything I was willing to give. You kept telling me you weren't ready, I said quietly. But you also kept telling me how lucky you were to have me. He frowned. I didn't know how to let you go without losing you. The words escaped before he could stop them, and I understood exactly what he meant. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing everything that came with me. In that moment, I realized Madison had never been the real issue. I hadn't been competing with her at all. I'd simply become the comfortable, dependable part of Ethan's life, the one he assumed would never leave. He reached for my hand. Sophia? I stepped back. I'm sorry. I believe you, I said quietly, but being sorry doesn't erase 6 months. For the first time since we'd met, I saw real fear in his eyes, not because I'd shouted or blamed him, but because I hadn't. There was nothing left to negotiate. I turned toward the cafe and picked up the shopping bag I'd left beside my chair. Ethan hurried after me. Wait, is that for me? I looked at the neatly wrapped briefcase inside. For one painful second, I imagined handing it to him anyway and pretending none of this had happened. Then his words echoed through my head. I think we should just be friends. That was enough. Without another word, I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked away. He called my name once, but I never looked back. The tears didn't come until I was halfway home. That night, the briefcase stayed unopened in the corner of my bedroom. I'd bought it for the man I thought was finally ready to choose me. Instead, it became a reminder of a future that had only existed in my imagination. For the next 2 days, it remained untouched in the back of my closet. Every time I opened the door, the shopping bag caught my eye, and I quickly looked away. I considered returning it more than once, but I couldn't. Letting go of the briefcase felt like admitting that everything I'd hoped for had ended before it had ever truly begun. Ethan kept calling. His first voicemail was careful. Sophia, I know you're upset. Please call me when you've had time to calm down. The next sounded more emotional. I don't want this to end like this. By the third, the apology had turned into frustration. You're overreacting. We can still be friends. The texts weren't much different. His texts never changed. I'm sorry. Can we talk? You misunderstood me. Please don't shut me out. I read every message once, archived the conversation, and never replied. For 6 months, I'd been the one waiting for Ethan. Now he was waiting for me. By Monday, the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like relief. I threw myself into work, finished projects I'd been putting off, and actually ate lunch with my coworkers instead of checking my phone every few minutes. Halfway through the day, I realized I hadn't wondered once why Ethan hadn't texted back. That hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time organizing my life around him that I'd forgotten how peaceful an ordinary day could feel. On Wednesday evening, another message appeared. Can I come over? I looked at the screen, then locked my phone. There was nothing left for him at my apartment. The drawer I'd cleared for his clothes was empty. His toothbrush was gone, and the spare key he'd once jokingly called our next step was sealed inside an envelope with his name on it. I mailed it the next morning. No note, no explanation, just the key. It said everything I no longer needed to. That afternoon, Lauren showed up outside my apartment. You've been hiding for 4 days. I've been working. She gave me a look. No, you've been surviving. That's different. Before I could argue, she dragged me to a neighborhood bookstore hosting a local author event. Normally, I would have stayed home. This time I went. The store smelled of coffee and old paper, and for the first time in days, my thoughts weren't consumed by Ethan. I was flipping through a travel photography book when another hand reached for the same copy. The man across from me smiled and pulled his hand back. Sorry, you saw it first. I laughed. No, go ahead. You sure? I'm trying to convince myself I don't need another expensive hobby. He glanced at the stack of history books under his arm and laughed. Then I'm failing spectacularly. I nodded toward the pile. You came in for one book? That was the plan. The conversation was effortless. Nothing about the conversation felt rehearsed. It was just two strangers talking, and I'd forgotten how easy that could be. I'm Ryan, he said, holding out his hand. Sophia. We ended up talking beside that bookshelf for almost half an hour about places we'd always wanted to visit, and the books that kept making us spend more money than we intended. When Lauren finally found me, she glanced between us with a knowing smile. So this is where you disappeared? Ryan laughed. I think I accidentally stole your friend. Not at all, Lauren replied. She's actually smiling again. Ryan looked slightly embarrassed. I hope I wasn't keeping you. You weren't, I said. He hesitated before speaking again. There's a coffee shop across the street, if you'd ever like to keep talking. I smiled. I appreciate the offer. Ryan slipped a business card from his wallet and handed it to me. No pressure, he said with an easy smile. If you ever want to argue about books, or let me prove my coffee recommendations are better than yours, you know where to find me. I took the card, and with a small wave, he headed for the exit without waiting for an answer. Lauren watched him leave before nudging my arm. He's cute, I noticed. So? I slipped the card into my purse. I'm still figuring my life out. She smiled. That's probably the healthiest thing you've said all week. By the time we reached the parking lot, I wasn't thinking about Ryan anymore. I wasn't looking for another relationship. What stayed with me wasn't hope. It was the reminder that meeting someone new didn't have to feel complicated. Meanwhile, Ethan kept reaching out. Thursday, please answer me. Friday, I made a mistake. Then, on Saturday morning, Madison and I aren't even serious. I stopped walking when I read it. Not because it changed anything, but because it showed he still didn't understand why I'd left. Another woman was never the point. The real problem was everything Ethan refused to give me. The problem was 6 months of half-truths, mixed signals, and letting me invest in a relationship he refused to define. That was the moment I blocked his number. Not out of anger, out of closure. A few days later, an email reminded me that my family streaming subscription was about to renew. When I logged in, Ethan's profile was still there alongside mine, Lauren's, and my younger sister Emma's. It also reminded me of everything else still connected to my account: the discounted gym membership we'd signed up for together, the movie club, and the premium food delivery plan. None of it was expensive on its own. Together, though, it told a story I'd ignored for months. Little by little, I'd made Ethan's life easier until both of us had started treating it as normal. So I removed him from every account. The streaming profile disappeared. The gym membership was canceled. The movie club stayed in my name. Everything else got a new password. The whole process took less than 15 minutes, but when I closed my laptop, my apartment felt noticeably lighter. That evening, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. Curiosity got the better of me. Sophia? It was Ethan. You blocked me. Yes. I just got kicked off the streaming account. My gym membership stopped working too. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I thought something had gone wrong. Nothing went wrong. Another pause. So, you removed everything. I removed what I was paying for. You didn't have to do that. I leaned against the kitchen counter. For 6 months, you kept reminding me we were just friends. He didn't say a word. So now I'm treating us exactly like friends. The silence lingered for a moment before I ended the call. About an hour later, another notification appeared. This one was from Ryan. Hope you found another book after I stole the one you wanted. I laughed without meaning to. It wasn't a grand moment, but it was the first time in weeks that my thoughts reached beyond Ethan. I had no idea his problems were only beginning. There was one financial commitment he'd completely forgotten was tied to me, and when the payment failed the following Monday, the consequences reached him faster than he expected. Monday started like any other workday. I arrived just before 8, set my coffee on my desk, and worked through my inbox until my phone rang around 10:30. Lauren glanced over the divider. Another unknown number? Looks like it. You going to answer? Something told me it wasn't Ethan this time. Hello? A polite voice answered. Good morning. Am I speaking with Sophia Bennett? Yes. My name is Karen from Westbrook Professional Institute. Your credit card is still listed as the primary payment method for Ethan Carter's professional certification program. I closed my eyes. Of course it was. Months earlier, Ethan had enrolled in a certification course he said would help him attract better clients. His transfer had supposedly been delayed, so I'd covered the first payment after he promised to reimburse me once his next contract came through. He never did, Karen continued. The payment authorization has been removed, so this month's installment couldn't be processed. Mr. Carter's enrollment has been placed on hold until payment is received. Then I remembered removing that authorization while canceling everything connected to my name. I understand, I replied. I'm no longer responsible for that account. We'll update our records. Thank you. The call ended, and I went straight back to work. I didn't think about it again until Lauren looked toward the lobby windows later that afternoon. Sophia, I think someone's here for you. I followed her gaze. Ethan was pacing outside the entrance, checking his phone every few seconds. The confidence he'd always carried so effortlessly had disappeared. You don't owe him a conversation, Lauren said. I know. I picked up my jacket. But I don't want to spend years wondering what I would have said. She nodded. Just don't let him change the story. The moment I stepped outside, Ethan looked relieved. Thank God. You shouldn't be here. I've been trying to reach you. I noticed. He took a step closer. Why did you cancel the payment? I stared at him. You mean the certification you promised you'd pay me back for? Sophia, that's not the point. I think it is. They suspended my enrollment. I'm aware. If I don't fix this, I could lose my place. I'm sorry to hear that. Frustration flashed across his face. So you're really going to let this happen? I folded my arms. Ethan, whose certification is it? He took a breath. Mine. And whose responsibility has it always been? He answered quietly. Mine. Then why are you asking me to fix it? He looked at me for a long moment. You've changed. I shook my head. No, I just stopped cleaning up your messes. He sighed. You know I can't come up with that kind of money overnight. I managed. His eyes dropped. I thought... He stopped. What did you think? He finally looked back at me. I thought you'd help. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. Just the assumption that I'd still be there whenever his life became difficult. That hurt more than anything he'd said at the cafe. Somewhere along the way, helping had become my role. Loving me never had. After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke again. I miss you. I finally looked at the man standing in front of me instead of the future I'd imagined. I was looking at the man standing in front of me. He looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders slumped, and the confidence I'd always associated with him had disappeared. As I looked at him, only one question mattered. Did he miss me? Or did he miss the life I'd made easier? I hope things work out for you, I said. He stared at me. That's it? I nodded. What else is there to say? I know I hurt you. You did. And I was confused. I shook my head. No, Ethan, you weren't confused. You had simply grown used to never being questioned. The words landed harder than I'd expected. I never meant to use you. I believe that, I replied, but your intentions don't change what happened. He opened his mouth, then quietly gave up trying to explain. Every excuse circled back to the same truth. He'd accepted everything I gave while refusing to give me certainty in return. I reached into my handbag. For a brief moment, hope crossed his face. Instead of money, I handed him a small white envelope. He frowned. What's this? The receipt for the briefcase. His expression changed. The one I bought before we met at the cafe. I didn't know. I bought it because I thought that day was going to be different. He looked down at the receipt. What happened to it? I returned it the next morning. He stood there holding the envelope as though it weighed far more than a single piece of paper. I'm sorry. This time the apology felt genuine. It was the first apology that sounded honest. I gave a small nod. I believe you. Then I turned towards the office. Sophia. I stopped without facing him. I'm not asking for another chance, he said quietly. I just wish I'd understood what I had before I lost it. I let out a slow breath. You didn't lose me all at once. I glanced back over my shoulder. You lost me a little more every time you chose uncertainty over honesty. This time he didn't follow me. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. There's a travel photography exhibit downtown on Friday. If you're free, I'd love the company. If not, no worries. I caught myself smiling. What stood out wasn't the invitation. It was the freedom to say yes or no without guilt. I replied, I'd like that. I thought that would be the end of the week. I was wrong. 2 days later, Ethan asked to see me one last time, and that conversation finally uncovered the truth he'd been avoiding from the beginning. Ryan was already waiting outside the gallery when I arrived Friday evening. He smiled, held up 2 paper cups, and said, I took a guess. Hope I got your coffee right. I took a sip and laughed. Either you were paying close attention, or you got incredibly lucky. I was fully prepared to drink both if I guessed wrong. I guess you pay attention. I try to. It was such a small moment, yet it meant more than the grand gestures I'd spent 6 months convincing myself were love. We wandered through the exhibit without rushing, stopping whenever a photograph caught our attention. Sometimes we talked about the images, and sometimes we simply stood beside each other in comfortable silence. Nothing felt forced. Neither of us was trying to impress the other. We were just enjoying the evening. Afterward, Ryan nodded toward the street. Hungry? I could eat. Good, I know a place nearby. Dinner was just as effortless. His phone never left his pocket. He listened instead of waiting for his turn to speak, and every question felt like genuine curiosity rather than polite conversation. By the time he walked me back to my car, I realized I hadn't spent the evening wondering where I stood. I had a really good time, he said. So did I. He hesitated before adding, I get the feeling you've been carrying something heavy. I met his eyes without answering. He smiled. You don't have to tell me tonight. Whenever you're ready. That was Ryan. Ryan always let me decide when I was ready. Thank you. Drive safe. He headed toward his car without trying to stretch the moment or turn it into something it wasn't. Halfway home, my phone rang. Another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Sophia? It was Ethan. I know you blocked my other numbers. I did. Please, just give me 10 minutes. His voice sounded tired in a way I'd never heard before. We've already said everything. No. He paused. I finally know what I should have said from the beginning. Every instinct told me to hang up. Instead, I agreed. 10 minutes. The next afternoon, we met at a quiet park overlooking the river. Ethan was already there holding 2 coffees. He offered me one. I wasn't sure if you'd still want this. I don't. He nodded, set both cups on the bench, and left them untouched. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. I've replayed that day over and over. I waited. At first, I told myself you'd misunderstood. He let out a tired laugh. The truth is, I was the one lying to myself. I never meant to hurt you, he continued. I convinced myself that because I never called you my girlfriend, I wasn't doing anything wrong. He looked at me. I kept calling that honesty. He shook his head. It wasn't. After another long pause, he admitted what he'd avoided saying all along. I liked the way you made me feel. I liked knowing someone believed in me. I got used to you being there, and I got used to everything you did for me. He rubbed a hand across his face. I never stopped to think about what it was costing you. What did you think would happen? I asked. I thought I'd figure my feelings out eventually. And did you? I realized what you meant to me after you walked away. I held his gaze. No. He frowned. You realized what it felt like to lose me. That's different. He didn't argue. Instead, he looked toward the river. I keep thinking about that briefcase. I can't stop picturing you sitting in that cafe with a gift you'd spent months saving for, while I was about to tell you we should just be friends. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. There was no desperation in those words anymore, only regret. I believe you're sorry. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, I said quietly, you probably don't. He accepted that with a slow nod. After a moment, he asked, Can I ask you something? You can. Is there someone else? Ryan immediately came to mind. His patience, his consistency, and how effortless it felt to be around him. There might be. The answer hit him exactly as I expected. I was too late. You were 6 months too late. He lowered his head. I really thought you'd always be there. More than anything else he'd said, that explained everything. Ethan hadn't mistaken me for the love of his life. He'd mistaken my loyalty for something that would always be there. I wasn't asking you to fall in love with me overnight, I said. I was asking you to stop keeping me in the middle. I know. I could have handled hearing no. What I couldn't handle was spending 6 months believing we were building the same future. His eyes filled with regret. I hate who I became. I looked at him for a long moment. I don't think you became that person overnight. He gave a small, defeated nod. I think you're right. There wasn't much left to say. I took a step back. This is goodbye. I know. And I won't contact you again. For the first time, I believed him. As I turned to leave, he called my name one last time. Sophia. I looked back. I really did care about you. I know, I said quietly. But caring isn't enough if you never choose the person standing in front of you. This time I walked away without looking back. He didn't follow. That evening, Ryan texted to invite me to an outdoor concert with a few friends. My first instinct was to decline. Then I caught myself. I wasn't saying yes because I needed someone to replace Ethan. I was saying yes because it genuinely sounded like a good evening. I'd love to. It seemed like a small decision, but it marked a much bigger change. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering whether someone else wanted me. I was asking myself what I wanted. Without realizing it, I'd already begun building a life that no longer depended on anyone else's choice. 3 months later, I walked past the same cafe where everything had fallen apart. Almost without thinking, I slowed down. Nothing had changed. The tables were in the same place. Sunlight still poured through the windows, and even the corner table where I'd waited for Ethan sat empty. Only I was different. You okay? Ryan slipped his hand into mine. I was just remembering. The good kind? I smiled. No. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. But it doesn't hurt anymore. He nodded without asking another question, and we kept walking. That was Ryan's way. He never treated silence like a problem that needed solving. If I wanted to talk, he listened. If I didn't, he simply stayed beside me. Our relationship grew the same way, steady, honest, and uncomplicated. Ryan's consistency was almost boring, and after Ethan, it felt extraordinary. None of those things sounded extraordinary. After Ethan, they meant everything. A few weeks later, we were making dinner when Ryan looked over from the stove. My sister invited us to her birthday next weekend. I told her I'd check with you first. I laughed. You asked me before answering your own sister? Of course. It's your family. He smiled. And you're my girlfriend. The word caught me completely off guard. You just called me your girlfriend. He looked puzzled. I've been calling you that for weeks. I honestly didn't notice. He walked over and wrapped his arms around my waist. I don't like leaving people wondering where they stand. The word settled somewhere deep inside me. Not because I needed the label, but because there had never been any hesitation behind it. There were no mixed signals or guessing games, just certainty. You okay? He asked. I smiled. Actually, better than okay. Life gradually became something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Peace. Work was going well, too. After leading one of the company's biggest client projects, I was promoted to senior project manager. Instead of pouring my time and money into someone else's future, I finally started investing in my own. I booked the solo trip to Italy I'd been putting off for years. Ryan never tried to change my mind. You've wanted this trip for years, he said. Then go. I'd rather miss you for 10 days than watch you keep putting your life on hold. That conversation stayed with me long after I came home from Italy. He never asked me to choose between him and the life I wanted. A few weeks later, Lauren called while I was sorting through the photos I'd taken during the trip. You'll never guess who I ran into. Ethan? She laughed. Was it that obvious? He asked how you were. I told him you looked happy. She hesitated before adding. Then he said something I can't stop thinking about. She repeated his words as closely as she could remember. I honestly thought she'd always be there. I didn't realize how much she'd been carrying until she stopped. I looked around my apartment before answering. The briefcase was long gone. I'd returned it months earlier, bought the camera I'd always wanted, and carried it across Italy instead. There wasn't a single reminder left of the future I'd once imagined with Ethan. So? Lauren asked. Does hearing that change anything? I smiled. No, it just means he finally understands. After we hung up, I stood by the window watching the rain. There was a time when hearing Ethan regret everything would have felt like the ending I'd been waiting for. Now it felt like a chapter from someone else's life. A month later, Ryan and I wandered back into the bookstore where we'd first met. The owner recognized us immediately. So the travel book finally did its job. Ryan laughed. I still think she let me have it. I absolutely didn't. You were impressed by my taste. I was impressed by your confidence. The owner shook his head, smiling as he walked away. Ryan slipped his hand into mine. I'm glad I reached for that book. So am I. For a long time, I thought meeting Ethan had changed my life. Looking back, leaving him changed it far more. People sometimes ask if I regret everything I poured into that relationship. The money, the time, the hope. I regret ignoring my instincts and convincing myself uncertainty was something I had to earn my way through. Ethan didn't destroy my ability to love. He taught me the difference between feeling wanted and being chosen. Ryan didn't rescue me. By the time we met, I'd already started choosing myself. He simply met the version of me that no longer settled for less. Sometimes I still think about the woman sitting alone in that cafe, hiding an expensive briefcase beneath the table while waiting for a man to finally call her his girlfriend. If I could sit beside her now, I wouldn't tell her to love less. I'd tell her to stop waiting for someone who had already shown her exactly where she stood. Walking away felt like the worst day of my life. Looking back, it was the day everything finally began.